Thank you very much for joining us today. I think the best place to start would be if you could give me your full name and your official title.
Okay, so my full name is Ryota Yoshimura, but in the US, ever since I started working in 1994, I've been called Randy, and I like it that way. So please call me Randy. My full title at the moment is Managing Director and General Manager of the Intelligence and Government Affairs Department.
Great. Now, I think what we'd like to do is just start from the very beginning so we can get to know you. I understand that you grew up in Tokyo, New York, and DC. Can you take us through that and maybe tell us a little bit about your father's work?
Sure. So my father, thank God he's still around, used to be a journalist, and he was a foreign correspondent. So when I was five, first year in kindergarten, my father had his first US assignment, which was in New York City. We lived in Queens as a family, and we lived there just under 3 years. Then we went back to Tokyo. And then my father had his second US assignment, which was in Washington, D.C. So we lived just outside Washington in the state of Virginia for about 3.5 years since I was in fifth grade. And then we went back. I finished junior high school, university in Japan, in Tokyo, and I joined Sumitomo in 1987. So believe it or not, 38 years ago.
Now, what was your father's position when he was a journalist?
So he was the bureau chief of the New York Bureau as well as the Washington Bureau. And he was responsible for foreign news, but he was continuously reporting about U.S., mainly U.S. politics, but other things that happening in the U.S. During his tenure.
Okay. Now, would you say that had an effect on your career and your trajectory and the things that you wanted to accomplish?
I never wanted to be a journalist because the hours were very difficult, as you can imagine. So in Japan, we have the morning edition and the evening edition as a newspaper. You have two deadlines every day. And of course, we didn't have email. We didn't have internet. So everything you had to handwrite it, and then you use a telex machine, which many of you don't know, to send the news to Japan. It was very long hours, very difficult. And so I never wanted to be a journalist, but I always wanted to have a global job. And maybe that's why I ended up in a company like Sumitomo.
And when you started with Sumitomo, what department did you start in?
So I was, for the first 20 years of my career at Sumitomo, I was in Aerospace and Defense department. We had different names back then, but it was basically I was doing defense-related business.
Okay. Now, what did you study in college?
In college, my major was in human geography, so nothing to do with defense. But that's typical of Japanese company hiring. They don't usually look at what you studied in college. They will train you after you join the company.
So when you went into aerospace and you said that you ended up spending almost 20 years doing that was your success. You were really good at what you were doing because they kept you in that area.
At least they kept me for 20 years, and then they sent me to Washington. Defense was, it came out of the blue because when you're joining Sumitomo, many of my colleagues understand this, but you never know which department you're ending up in if you enter the company in Japan. So the HR department will meet with, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of students, university students. My year, we had 90 of us. So it was a class of 87, and there were 90 of us that joined Sumitomo on April 1st. I've never worked for the HR department, so I don't really know how it works, but they divide you up into, they will say, Mr. Yoshimura, you go to this, you report to this department, Mr. Watanabe, you report to this department, so on and so forth. So I don't know how I ended up in the aerospace department, but that's where I landed. But it was really, it was very surprising because I never thought about doing military related business when I was in college. But then if I were sent to some other department, I would have probably reacted the same. Maybe nothing special there. But the work was really interesting in that it wasn't just selling or buying. It wasn't just about business, but it was about the geopolitics. You look at not just Japan, but the security environment that Japan is placed in. And it was still 1987, so it was toward the end of the Cold War. Japan had tense relationship with Soviet Union at the time. China was still very young, and they were a totally different country. And then we had North Korea. So the geopolitical environment we are now in, very different from 38 years ago. But still, you looked at that total picture. You need to analyze that well in order to be successful in defense business. Let's just say that.
Now, your time in defense, then you shift over to Washington and Washington affairs. Do you understand the move that they made in retrospect, how what you knew then might help this, or was it still just, I'm not sure why they did it?
My boss at the time, his name was Mike. He was a Japanese guy in Tokyo. He called me into a conference room in my 20th year of my career, and he said, "Would you like to go to Washington?" I said, "Okay, why not?" Because, like I said earlier, I used to live here when I was fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth grade, and I was already familiar with the town. And also because I did defense business, I came here on business trips multiple times. I knew what I was getting into, at least geographically. However, at the time, I didn't know what we did as government affairs or research. So geographically, it was familiar territory, but the work itself was almost brand new to me. So it was challenging, but I thought maybe I could contribute to the company because not many people are familiar with what happens in Washington, D.C.
In general, I think the Washington office is viewed as an office that can inform our business groups about what is going on and what affects them. What is the typical day for you when it comes to those type of tasks and the ones maybe that we don't know about? What is the usual day for the general manager?
The Washington ecosystem consists of several components. First of all, the private sector, like ourselves, like many large companies have offices in Washington. They are usually fairly small, but they have an office here. And then there's the U.S. government, which is the huge player here. You have the Congress and you have the executive branch, which are the departments like DOD or DOS, the White House, the Labor Department, the Commerce Department, so on and so forth. And then there are the think tanks. Think tanks are here to think and come up with good policy, and they advise the government. And they would have many events on a daily basis. So we would go, we would learn about the topics, and we also give feedback from the private industry point of view, because in order to form a new policy or change a policy, you need inputs from many different players. The people in the public sector don't necessarily know what happens in the private sector. So we need to speak up. We need to tell them that's a good idea or that's not a good idea. It may have unintended consequences. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? So we're here to, if you will, like shape or at least give some feedback or give some inputs into that process where and how the policy is formed in this town. So we play a role in that. And by playing that role, we are heard as a company, and also we learn what other companies are saying or what other stakeholders are saying. We know, where this is going, how the wind is blowing, which way, how hard the wind is blowing. We're like an outpost of Sumitomo, and we measure the temperature, we measure the wind direction, the strength of the wind, so on and so forth.
You have said in the past that governments are increasingly influencing industries. Now, how does your role navigate those complexities?
That policy, of course, changes from one period to another, and policies change from one administration to another. Currently, we are in an era where governments are heavily involved in industrial policy. Now, they may not call it industrial policy, but that's what it is. It could have positive incentives and it could have negative incentives. For example, what do I mean by that? What I mean by positive incentive is that if you come to the US, if you invest in this kind of sector, we will give you some subsidies. Okay, so maybe we can use some of that subsidy. Or currently, the new president is already saying this, but he wants more tariffs. Now, for those of us who are importing stuff from Japan or Mexico or Canada or Vietnam or any country, you may be impacted by tariffs. And tariffs, of course, increases the cost. So it's not good news for importers into this country. And that is certainly a negative incentive. But we need to know as early as possible where the policies are going. Businesses always have to react to the environment, not just government policies, but we need to be nimble, we need to be agile, we need to know where the trend is going or policies are going so that we could act faster than our competitors. Through our activities in the Washington office, we can help our business departments maximize their profits or minimize their losses. I think that is the biggest role we have.
What would you say is the most surprising part of your job as the Washington office's job has evolved over the past 20, nearly 30 years? You've seen administrations come and go, political parties move one way and another. What would you say is maybe the most surprising thing that you guys do now that maybe you didn't do when you walked in the office for the first time?
I walked in the office in 2006. That was the beginning of my first Washington assignment. And at that time, we only did research. Now, nothing wrong with doing just research, but research is a reactive part of our work. Now, based on our research, we may think, oh, maybe if we can talk to these people in the government and change this or change that, or maybe we could help them if they're still in the process of forming a new regulation, maybe we could talk to them and help them craft in a way where it does not negatively impact what we do, or it may positively impact what we do, which is even better. So in 2017 or 18, the Washington office expanded our role, not just from research only to government affairs / government advocacy, or some people call it lobbying. So we could do both reactive as well as proactive work in Washington. And I think it's like the two wheels of a vehicle. It's better to have both, not just research, not just government affairs, but to have both research and government affairs. And I think that is a very balanced approach. And we didn't have that when I was here the first time. We had now, just about 2 years before I came on this assignment, SCOA decided to expand. And because there was a necessity, the first Trump administration imposed a lot of tariffs on many countries, including allies like Japan. And we needed to talk. We were hoping to get waivers on those tariffs. And in order to do that, under the US laws and regulations, if we're going to have lobbying, we need to register ourselves as lobbyists, and we need to do certain things. We needed to do quarterly reporting of what we did and things like that. In order to be compliant with the rules and the regulations, we have to beef up a little bit. And we started that operation about 7 years ago. That is the big difference between my first assignment and my second assignment. And I think it came from that necessity to go talk to the U.S. government to defend some of our business, what we do, and what SCOA does in the U.S.
Now, would you say that experience is helping you to gear up for the next administration?
I think so, but they're also. It's also a second administration for them, so I'm sure they're smarter. So we need to be even smarter to counter react to their policies. They hope to be ready on day one. They're going to hit the ground running. We also need to hit the ground running come January 20th.
If you were to give advice to business personnel who are working on leveraging their governmental and or geopolitical intelligence, what advice or insight would you give someone?
I think government is something you need to talk to. Don't feel that there's nothing you can do about what government does. I think there's room for us to maneuver. If you talk, they will listen. And so I don't think there's any downside to coming to Washington and maybe at least talk to the government and or to the people around the stakeholders in Washington, what your needs are or what your worries are. Of course, you need to have a good narrative. At the end of the day, you need to say, this is good for America. This is good for the American industry. This is good for the American people. This is good for the American economy. It has to be a balanced approach, but we can help you create that narrative so that the US government could be more conducive to such an approach.
I'm sure when you are in rooms full of people who are just finding out about Sumitomo Corporation of Americas for the first time, your sort of elevator speech or quick explanation of what we do and how we do it has become somewhat of a template for others to use. If you don't mind, when someone says, "Oh, I don't know about SCOA," what do you generally say?
Stephen, that's a very good question. I joke. I say, if you give me 30 minutes, I'll explain to you what we do. But my short answer is Sumitomo is a company that does many things in many countries, and we have many different business models. That's the 10-second version of my explanation. And usually elevator pitches are 30 seconds or 20 seconds.
Right.
So I can't go much longer than that. But I try to put it in a context where it's readily relatable for the person, for the audience. And I try to frame it in the narrative that I just explained to you. And what does this mean for, this is coming from a Sumitomo Corporation or a SCOA. It may be a Japanese company or 100% wholly owned US company. But this is how what we do, how it impacts the American people, the American economy, why it's good for the American people or how it helps the American economy and so on and so forth. So I try to put it in that frame so that it's easy relatable to the audience.
It depends on who you're talking to sometimes as to how to explain it.
Of course. And if we get close enough, maybe I can spend a little bit more time talking about the 400 history of Sumitomo, but that's not 101. Sumitomo 101 is I try to keep it simple.
I know that you are a longtime musician, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about the band and recent performances like at the Sakura Matsuri Street Festival and things like that. How did you get started playing guitar? Because I know that's one of the things you do.
Yes, I'm not a great player, but I enjoy it very much. I started playing the guitar and I also play a little bit of piano as well. I like various musical instruments. I started playing the piano when I was in elementary school and the guitar when I was in junior high. And in the 1970s, that's what we did. You played rock music. If you wanted to be a popular guy at school, that's what you did. So that's how I started. I played music when I was in junior high school. In college, I was away from music for a while. And during work, I stayed away for a while because in order to do band, you need to have other people. And sometimes when you're busy with work, it's difficult to get together and practice unless you have a place to practice because it could get noisy. I stayed away for a while. But when I came back to Washington last time, there were several of us that said, yeah, I used to play the guitar like 30 years ago or 25 years ago. So we said, why don't we get together and play? And there were like 4 or 5 of us that got together in the basement of my colleague and we played and it was a lot of fun. So, okay, let's do a band. And I did that for a while, several years. And then I went back to Japan. Some of the expats came back to Tokyo. So we continued to play in Tokyo. But then they sent me here again. I said goodbye to my band members in Tokyo. And once after I came here, I found new friends to play with. So we've been active. Usually we play every year, every spring at the Cherry Blossom Festival, Sakura Matsuri, and in March and sometimes in April. And mostly we play J-pop songs.
during this period of time in Washington? And even going back to the first round, what would you say is your most rewarding moment?
So there are about like 50 large Japanese companies offices in Washington. And we're very close. It's a very small Japanese community, or Japanese corporate community, I should say. There are both Americans and Japanese representing the offices. But we get together. I'm currently the president of the Japan Commerce Association of Washington. I get to meet the representatives of not just the trading companies, but the manufacturers, the telecoms, also the embassy, the ambassador, and the ministers. So that gives me a lot of visibility of what's going on in Washington. Sometimes they ask for my support, so I tell them I try to support them as much as I can, but it's a two-way street. So I help them and they can help me, and it works. I think it works well. And that is a not just being the general manager of SCOA's Washington office, but being the president of the Commerce Association gives me a lot of visibility and exposure in this town. It really helps me with my work.
It seems that the trading companies are extremely competitive. How are you able to have this sort of relationship? That seems like a delicate area.
It is. So in Washington, especially when we're doing research, it's not a zero-sum game. We can help each other. We don't talk about our individual businesses, but we can help each other when we're doing research. Maybe we can, if you can help somebody, they'll help you, and maybe we get a better idea of what's going on in this town or in the policy sector. We talk to each other. Of course, we have to walk a very fine line, but we're very good friends here. It's a small, very tight-knit community, and it's very different. I worked at SCOA in New York office from 94 to 2000. New York City is much bigger and lots of Japanese companies. New York City is almost like mini Tokyo. Here, the Japanese corporate community is so small that you almost know everybody. I probably do know everybody, and they know me. So that helps when I need to do research or be introduced to somebody, and we help each other.
Okay. As general manager, what do you hope to achieve in this role as you continue? I know there's a new administration coming in, so there will probably be some changes, or maybe there won't be changes in how you are dealing with research and relationships and all that sort of thing. What do you hope to do going forward, would you say?
Okay, so I'm sure there'll be changes. Some policies will not change. For example, the current protectionist inclination of U.S. government has started maybe toward the end of Obama period, and then it was amplified during the first Trump, and then it was carried on during Biden, and looks like Trump will even amplify it further.
When you say protectionist, well, what do you mean exactly?
Oh, that's the like the tariffs on imports or restriction on foreign investment in the US, or maybe some outbound investments to China, for example. The government is trying to put a fence around certain areas, very sensitive technology areas, for example. That won't change. It'll probably get stronger, but the policy itself won't change. I think some of the areas we need to continue to up here, but certainly there will be some areas that will see big change. For example, green transformation, GX area, where Biden went doubled on green, clean energy, renewables, allocating lots of funds, subsidies for companies that operate in that area. Now, Donald Trump, he will not incentivize just the green energy or just the renewable energy, but he will also incentivize oil and gas, fossil fuel.
Let me just ask real quick, how does this affect the infrastructure bill? Should we expect that to just get cut off, or are they going to follow through? How do you predict that going forward?
Okay, so that's a difficult question. We don't know, but Donald Trump wants to extend the tax cuts that he started in 2017, which means he needs to find more funding to subsidize that tax cut. So he's looking for unspent money. So the money that had already gone out the door for bridges and railroads and highways. They'll stay, the money that has already gone out. The money that is still in the US government, he may repurpose. He may want to redirect that money to fund his tax cuts. We need to be careful for those future programs that are still not, the funds that are not appropriated yet. It's already in the bank, but not been spent.
Okay. I guess my last question is, I imagine there's people who get here, maybe rotating staff or maybe local staff who they just don't take advantage of all that the Washington office has to offer. How can they amp up their Washington office relationship?
So we need to do a better job advertising ourselves. And so I'm happy to do this kind of work internally. We want to increase our exposure because we always have new people, right? Like you said, we have new expats and we have new local hires. And so this is a continuing effort. For us, we need to expose ourselves. We need to tell people what we can do and what we cannot do, of course, for that matter. We try to be proactive in attending internal conferences, and we try, if we have opportunities to do presentation about the economy, about the policies, or what have you, in internal meetings, we never say no to an opportunity. There are many departments who take advantage of what we do here, but there are certain departments that don't owe us that well. So they never call us, they never send us an email. So I hope that we get to encourage those who have not spoken to the Washington office. Some of the business you do may or may not have impact by the U.S. government policies. If you're not familiar with us, please knock on our door. We'll be more than happy to talk to you. I listen to your needs, listen to your issues, your challenges, and then we will try to offer you our 2 cents. Our door is always open. Please.
I just wanted to go back to the guitar for just a moment. During the pandemic, did you practice much? Did you get better? Or did you occupy yourself other ways?
As far as guitar goes, playing the guitar itself, I think it's safe. But if I start singing, that may not be safe for other people in the small room.
Randy, once again, thank you very much for talking to us about your role in the Washington office. And we hope that you will be approached more by some of the areas that don't seem to know that they have an ally and a friend in Washington.
Yes, it's a very small office, only 8 of us, including myself, but hope we can be some help to you. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.